We have one speaker today she's a deep pool of information. So I know she has a lot of great information to share with us. It's Elaine Clegg. She's a program coordinator at Idaho Smart Growth. And she's also the Boise City Council president. And Elaine is going to talk about something that we're watching change quickly everywhere in the world: transit and telecommuting in the age of COVID-19. So Elaine, you want to take it away?
You bet. Thank you, Cynthia, and welcome everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. It's kind of one of my passions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully it works. We'll get there in just a second. Okay, can you guys all see that? All right, great. That's good to see, good to hear. Well, I thought I would give Cynthia a little bit of a promotion here up front. I really appreciate her doing the Silver Lining series. I think the Idaho Walk Bike Alliance and Idaho Smart Growth have worked hard together to make sure that as much information as possible gets out to all the people who are interested. So thank you, Cynthia. Also give a little shout out to my organization, Idaho Smart Growth. We've started a series called Smart Pandemic Pivots. Although this is not officially a part of that, I think it's certainly in line with the kinds of things that we're talking about there. And so if any of you are interested, there's going to be one. Again, I can't remember. We have another one scheduled, but Sarah will get information to all of you if you're interested. So today, I'm going to talk about the effects of COVID-19 on transit as we're seeing them in real time, the effects on telecommuting, again, in real time. We'll have a Q&A after each section, and there will be some interactive polling that will happen throughout the presentation. Sarah will pull those up for us. During each of the sections, if you do have a question, raise your hand. It's best if you stay on mute and then we don't get feedback. And then everyone can unmute when we get to the question and discussion portion at the end of each section, if that works for you. And Sarah, if you'll help watch for people's hands being raised, because I might miss it. If somebody raises their hand, she'll shout it out if I do miss it, okay? So the effects of COVID-19 on transit have been pretty stark, almost as stark as they've been on telecommuting. Transit ridership has tanked all over the country. And so that's had some impacts on transit and how it operates. But they've learned some things. There's been some lessons from that. And now there's beginning to be some thinking about what it will take to bring riders back to transit when we're completely through this. Probably, certainly we'll want some more riders to come back over the next year, but a year from now, when we actually are through this, what should transit be doing to plan for really bringing riders back? So right now, ridership's down 30 to 60% on most bus-based systems and 50 to 90% on many of the light rail train systems. BART, for instance, is losing $55 million a month. It's one of those systems that's down 90%. As a result, APTA called for emergency funding for US transit agencies for the first time ever. Congress carved out $25 billion in the CARES Act specifically for transit. It went immediately to the transit agencies based on the formula pools that they usually participate in. It got to them within 6 days. So it was pretty amazing. First time that's ever happened, and it really has been a lifeline to many of these systems that people rely on for really important, the important work that they're doing, the essential workers. We'll talk about that. So how did transit systems respond? Well, this is another really interesting part of this. Those of you who've worked around or in transit know that it's just really got a reputation for being slow and methodical, not responding quickly. But boy, have they responded quickly and well, I think, in almost every case. Many of them went to either touchless fare collection or they just simply suspended fares just because of the transaction of touching, bringing money or bringing a card on board was such a big risk to both the driver and the user of spreading the COVID. Almost all of the bus-based systems around the country have gone to backdoor boarding. That can increase social distancing. That back door is far from the driver, so the driver doesn't have to get exposed every time someone comes on. In addition, the back door has two directions to go, so if two people board at the same time, they can go different directions and social distance easily. They've instituted enhanced cleaning in many cases because of the next item, reduced routes and redesigned routes. Some of the drivers no longer have a route to drive, and instead of simply laying them off, they've repurposed them to, every time the bus comes back from its route run, somebody comes on board and cleans. And they've done a really good job of that. Because of the change in ridership, many of the systems have reduced their routes, but more importantly, a lot of them did surveys, looked at where the really important riders were, the people who had to get to our essential jobs, and redesigned routes so that those workers could get to those jobs more effectively, more efficiently. So this has been a pretty cool thing. Lessons learned from COVID are that transit agencies can in fact respond quickly. They can implement changes quickly. They're not that old stick in the mud agency that we've been told. They're actually very nimble agencies that are willing and able to look at data and respond to that data and figure out how to make their systems work even in the face of this tremendous crisis. The other really important lesson we learned is that transit serves many of our essential workers. On average, over 33% of normal riders, over a third of the normal riders of a normal transit system are folks that we would put in that essential worker category. Our healthcare workers, our food workers, those folks. And so if our transit systems had simply shut down during this crisis, we'd be in a heck of a mess because many of the nurses wouldn't be able to get to the hospitals, many of the grocery clerks wouldn't be able to get to the stores. This really has pointed out what an essential piece of our transportation infrastructure transit is. And I think in a really good way, I think the response of Congress shows that that's being recognized, not just within the transit world, but across the world of government and understanding why do we subsidize transit? Well, we do because it's an essential piece of our infrastructure, just like roadways, and we certainly subsidize those. So what will it take to bring transit back? As we think, so in the short term, I think the transit systems will continue doing what they're doing. They'll continue, most of them, either with fareless systems and high touch cleaning and all of that. But many of them are beginning to think long term. And long term, another thing that the crisis has showed is that there really are some spines in our transit network in almost every location, every locale around the country. And so transit agencies are beginning to really think about focusing on those high capacity routes, those routes that are most important in the system, making service on those routes really, really good high capacity service. And so in doing that, they've begun to think also about, well, if we reduce service on some of the other routes, then how are we going to get people to the high capacity routes? So they're beginning to think about how to improve first mile, last mile connections, and beginning to think what the connecting bus routes are that are needed to make those high capacity routes work. And then they're thinking about mobility hubs, and that would be the place where connections happen. I forgot to stop and allow Sarah to run our first poll. So I'm going to do that now so we can begin to see who it is we have on the call today. And so this question is a multiple choice one. Choose all of those that work for you, and we'll see who we have on the line today. And when each of you get your answers in, Sarah will bring up the results for us.
Don't be shy. And it looks like Elaine and Cynthia, you two should participate as well.
I thought I did.
I don't see any coming through. Has anyone filled out the poll yet?
Okay, so something's.
Sarah,
Okay.
I did submit it already.
Okay, well, let me see what happens if I push end. Let's see what happens.
Do I need to pause sharing?
Oh, interesting. It didn't work at all.
Wow.
I got no responses.
Shall we try it one more time?
Yeah. Let's see if it works this time. No, it's not working.
I'll be darned. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll let Sarah work in the background and see if she can figure out why.
I will
Whoops.
figure it out.
Now I got off the, okay. So anyway, as you saw in that poll, what we're looking for is really probably most people would answer the top three, I'm guessing, who are with us today, because the folks who are still riding transit are essential workers and they're probably at work right now, or at least many of them are. And so I think it's instructive to all of us to keep that in mind. So it was why I had that poll. So anyway, systems are thinking hard about trying to bring riders back by making their system more productive. And that's what this high capacity redesign might do for a system. The other thing they're thinking about is really continuing to do some of the things they're doing now. So many of them just went to no fares because they didn't have the technology yet in hand to do touchless fare collection. I was on a webinar yesterday that had 3 different companies that have developed nationwide touchless fare systems. And I suspect that almost every transit agency in the country by the end of next year will have instituted those. It will mean you never have to have cash. It means that if you're unbanked, you can go to a grocery store or somewhere else and buy a card that will allow you to do the touchless. They've worked that part out. They've also worked it out in many places so that if you're not from that city, if you're a visitor and you don't want to download the local app, you can have the national app on your phone and it'll work in systems all over the country. And so I think that's going to be a big innovation that will continue. There will probably be continued distancing on board. The question is how long? Will people begin to feel comfortable being in a crowded subway or a crowded bus once we get a vaccine? No one really knows for sure. So it might mean that transit systems really have a lower ridership for a while until we figure that out. There will be other kinds of improved apps that will allow you, especially if there is still this continued fear of being close to people, will allow you to make sure when that next bus is coming, but also be able to look at what the conditions on board of that bus are. Is it crowded? Is it not? Is that the one you want to get on? And I think that will be a really exciting, I think something that will be good for riders, exciting improvement for riders. I'm going to let you all unmute at this point and let me know if you all have heard of anything beyond these innovations that you think transit systems will likely be trying to do. Anyone? Okay, well, I'm not hearing, so we'll go ahead and go on. Sarah, do you want to try another poll or not?
Yeah, let's give it a try again.
Okay, let's.
Would you like to go with the second question?
Yeah, let's try this second question.
Okay. So I think we may have figured out the technical glitch, but we're gonna test this out, and I'll give you guys about another. We'll say, what do you think? 30 seconds.
Okay.
Can everybody see the question on their screen and select their answers? And this is a choose two, so it's a multiple choice option, but choose the top two. Okay, so here's the true kicker. I'm gonna end the poll here in just a second and share the results. And for me, it shows a bunch of zeros, but I think I know why. So you tell me if you see numbers. Does that show anything for you guys?
It is showing, yes.
Perfect. Well, that's what matters. It can be all zeros
Okay.
for me as long as you guys see it.
So 50% of us would like touchless fare collection. 60% would like enhanced cleaning continuing. 45% would like continued opportunities to distance on board, and 65% want this extra information about the next bus. So that's really great information. And I'm certainly going to share some of this with Valley Regional Transit, which Jim and I serve on the board of together. So hopefully that's a great thing. So, all right. So what are some of the challenges going to be post-COVID, at least from what people are talking about? There's likely to be a reduced commute demand, and we'll talk about that in the next session with telecommuting. But even without telecommuting, there's at least some common wisdom that folks will shy away from transit, at least in the near term, for their commute. And so as a result of that, there's going to be a funding issue. With fewer riders. And perhaps if it's easier for a system to just stay with a fareless system, no fares, rather than going to the touchless fares, they'll be collecting less at the fare box or none at the fare box. And then there's some question about the viability of some of the micro mobility providers post-COVID. So Uber and Lyft are struggling. People are not as eager to ride them, even though some of them are still providing rides. The scooters haven't come back on the street yet in Boise. They've really not come back on the street yet anywhere because prior to COVID, they were losing money. And as a result of COVID and looking at their future, many of them have determined that they're going to continue to lose money, and their investors are telling them they're not real keen on continuing to lose money if there's no end in sight. So it may take a real rethinking of what micromobility means, and maybe like here with the green bike, where it actually is subsidized both by some government funding, a little bit of federal funding, but in addition by sponsorship. That will be the model that we'll have to go to on all micromobility, and not just for systems like our bike share system. So we've had all these grand ideas about why transit, all these aspirations, and all the good things that it could do. And those things are still valid. But what we've learned is that what transit really does is provide mobility to those without, without mobility otherwise due to age, income, or disability. It also allows highly agglomerated places, cities, especially urban core cities, to function. And so transit is going to continue to be very, very important, but there's going to be some challenges in figuring out how to go forward with it. So shall we try the next poll? There we go. Before I go to the next one, I wanted to ask you all, what kind of service enhancements would help you, entice you to use transit? In this case, again, you get to choose your top two. You don't get to choose everything.
Okay, I'll give everyone a few more seconds here. It looks like someone figured out that it doesn't limit you. Yes, it's an artificial limit that's been placed on you. So don't cheat the system. All right, here we go. Let's see what you guys came up with.
Frequent service wins the race, and expanded service comes in second, and the rest are quite a ways behind. So that's good to know. Again, Jim and I will share this with VRT. I think that those certainly have been the things that they've been talking about a lot. So thank you. Oh, that is it. We're to questions and discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see everybody. And
you do have more questions if you would like to do more polling.
well, we'll do that in the next section.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Right. So any questions about the transit part of it? Go ahead, Carl first, and then Dave.
Actually, it's not a question. There's a book that I just recently came across called Better Buses, Better Cities,
Yes.
written by Stephen Higginscheidt. And if anybody has an opportunity to get a copy of that, I recommend it highly.
Yeah, it's a great book. I haven't read the whole thing. I've read excerpts from it, and I was able to see a presentation by Steve. And there's actually a group of folks who are trying to bring him to the Boise area once we can travel again and gather people together to do a presentation. So noted. Okay, Dave.
Well, speaking on behalf of Valley Regional Transit, I want to say that we have done many of the things that
You're kind of soft, Dave. Can you get closer? There you go.
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay. Speaking on behalf of Valley Regional Transit, we are doing many of the things that you have talked about. After the governor issued his stay-at-home order, we stopped collecting fares on the buses, and we ask our passengers to enter and exit through the rear doors. Every bus gets a thorough cleaning overnight before it goes into service in the morning. And then during the day, because we reduced routes initially, the drivers that weren't driving were on cleaning detail. So between runs, they would get into the buses and they would wipe down all of the frequently touched surfaces. We are also encouraging social distancing on the buses. We are limiting the number of passengers to 10 on the larger buses. And to accommodate that, we have increased frequency, especially on the number 9 State Street. And if we get to the point where we need more buses, we add them to the routes since we have some extra buses and drivers. But starting on Monday, the 18th, we will be back to more or less normal service. The one thing we are asking our riders to do is to wear face coverings when they get on the buses. As we hope more people get on the buses, wearing a face covering will be vitally important to the health of everyone involved.
Thank you, Dave. I should have mentioned that everything I'm talking about has been instituted by VRT. They're one of those organizations that has shown us how nimble and progressive they can be. Thank you.
Can I add to that?
You bet.
VRTs also, we're working to release the procurement here, I think in another week and a half, for the validators needed for a touchless pay system. So we're moving forward on that as well to introduce that, and hopefully by fall have that system up in place so that we can limit those interactions going forward.
That's great to hear. And I should note, you know, from an economic standpoint, transit agencies' dollars go farther, create more jobs than almost any other transportation dollar. 31% more jobs than road expansion projects, 16% more jobs than road maintenance projects. And on the procurement end, the bus systems have been continuing to procure things like the touchless fare systems, new buses in anticipation of increased ridership. So from an economic standpoint, transit is actually stepping up really, really well during this COVID. All right, shall we go back and talk about telecommuting a bit?
Hey, Elaine, there's a
Yes.
question here that I'd like to read and see if you or one of the other VRT folks can answer.
Okay.
I'm excited about VRT's interest in demand-based service for some areas of Nampa and Caldwell. Can anyone comment?
We're excited too.
Well, there are a couple of good reasons why we are doing this. The bus service in Nampa and Caldwell is pretty minimal, and the fixed route system doesn't seem to be doing the best job that it could be. So we are in the process of soliciting a vendor to help us do this on-demand service. And there will be some designated areas where people can pick up a bus, but actually a bus will not go out unless there is demand for it. So someone says, I want to get from point A to point B, then we will dispatch a bus to pick them up and deliver them to their destination. It is an innovative approach to try and cover a pretty extensive area of Nampa and Caldwell and to provide better service. The details are still being worked out, and we don't yet have a vendor to provide it, but all of that is coming, so stay tuned.
Great to hear. Okay, I'm gonna, let's see. I'll go back and share my screen. Okay. So the next section is talking about telecommuting, and just as transit was impacted by this, so was driving. It declined precipitously, and it did so because there was really an unanticipated success in working from home. We've learned some things from that, and again, as with transit, people are beginning to think, okay, what next? How can we use these lessons once we get past this? So driving is down 40 to 60%, almost universally across the country. The downside of that, especially if you're in the transportation business, and this includes transit because some of the money that goes to transit comes from the gas tax, is that gas tax collections have also tanked. And I did mean that as a pun. Hopefully you took it that way. But those gas tax collections, they believe, could be as low as 30% of what was predicted or expected for this quarter. If that continues, the federal transportation program will either have to be funded from the general fund or they'll have to reduce funding. As for the state, expectations are that it's down, maybe not quite as much, but pretty close. Again, both the money that goes to ITD and the money that goes to all the local transportation agencies will have to be reduced by whatever % those collections are down. The upside is that a lot of people started working from home and found out they could work from home. Previously, there was a lot of skeptics about this, and as it turns out, 56% of the jobs in this country are at least partially compatible with working from home. As you can see from this chart, higher paying jobs and people who are in those jobs are more likely to be able to work from home and have been more likely to work from home during this crisis. As you can see in the bottom quintile, there were many people who just had to stay home with no work. Many of those included our salon operators, those kinds of folks. And so there's really been, it's really pointed out the inequality in our economy to some extent. The essential workers are still at the job site, so they're the ones who have not been able to work from home. So again, there's a lot of lessons from this. We have seen incredibly reduced emissions. Air quality has gone up across the board exponentially. So people with asthma have experienced fewer attacks. People who exercise outdoors are really enjoying it. I think almost all of us are just enjoying the fact that when you get outdoors, you can breathe easily, doesn't smell bad. There was a picture of Los Angeles. I haven't seen the foothills on the east side of Los Angeles for years in some cases, and there was a picture of Los Angeles and they were crystal clear in the background. Pretty amazing. Some folks who have simply just given up their office, and one of the things that will be looked at, I think, as we go on, is that there's reduced office and workspace costs. Even the people who are still paying leases on offices are not, if no one's in there, they're not paying to have them cleaned as often. The energy costs are down, and so even those folks are saving some money by not having people there. It helps people, especially women, achieve a work-life balance. This has been something that's been really difficult, especially in this country where we don't have very good childcare provision or any support for childcare provision for women to both work outside the house and find some kind of a balance in taking care of their families or being a partner in taking care of their families. Some people find they're more productive at home. I can't tell for myself yet, but some people are. And one of the ones that I think a lot of you have noticed and have talked about, and we've seen a couple of other webinars on this, is that it's freed up a lot of road space that's allowed us to have a more balanced transportation system with walking, biking, and potentially in some places dedicated bus lanes. So that's been a real positive. Sorry, there we go. There's some downsides to it. If you're a manager, managing telecommuting staff can be a little bit more difficult, especially if it's very big. I know my husband's experienced some of that. Just the communication with the various engineers that he works with has been a little more difficult. Professional isolation can negatively impact well-being and career development. It's especially true for extroverts and people who really thrive on that social interaction. Some people are less productive, probably those same people. And we really don't know the impacts over the long term of a scaled up system. We don't have a support system in our communities for this kind of work balance. And so it will take some time for that to happen if we end up with a lot of people working from home. For instance, many suburban communities have a lot of people working from home. They have no services anywhere nearby. They can't walk or bike to a grocery store, or even in many cases for very productive recreation. So if this is going to continue, we got to figure that out. a lot of companies think that this is a great thing, and they're looking forward to keeping folks working at home. And many of their employees are looking forward to continuing to work at home. And so I think now we'll bring up the next poll, Sarah, and see if you guys want to keep working at home. And if you aren't currently working at home, either don't answer or answer in what you think would be how you'd respond.
Okay, I'll give everyone a couple more seconds. This is a multiple choice.
Oh, this one was supposed to be only, let's see, I guess I did mess that up. This one was supposed to be only one, but I think that's probably how most people answered it. So pretty evenly split between who'd like to stay working from home every day and who'd like to return to the office. And most of us would like to work at home some and work at the office some. So that's probably not real surprising.
Does that show that this is mostly an extroverted group on this call?
Could be. Who knows, right? So challenges of working from home post-COVID. There might be more drive alone. So this is an interesting one that we don't know the answer to. I should have said at the beginning, a lot of this is really speculation. Nobody knows yet. There's no real data. So a lot of experts talking about it, a lot of people saying, well, this could be, and trying to gather data, but not a lot of data yet. But one of the theories is that people will be less, probably will use transit less because they'll be a little more fearful of using it. And so if they go, even if we still have more people working from home, overall, we may have just as many cars on the road because folks who used to ride transit are now driving and driving alone. We're already running up against broadband capacity in many communities across the country, especially smaller communities, more rural communities. Having this many people working from home every day has really put a load on that. There's a real uncertainty because of this speculation about whether people will drive less or more, even if there's more people working from home, about what the impact will be on the roadway network. So some of us, I think I went into this hoping that maybe there was evidence that there would be less demand for road widening, for instance. And right now, that's a real uncertainty. No one knows for sure. You can see on the bottom, maybe traffic will be less, maybe it won't. And so I think it will behoove all of us who want to know the answer to that to stay engaged and make sure that the question is asked in such a way that we really get some data on it and there's not just some assumptions. I heard on a phone call yesterday, a local transportation official say, well, yeah, there might be less demand in the future, but we're already so far behind on roadway capacity that we'll keep widening things. And I'm not sure if that's the right answer. So it may involve all of us continuing to advocate to make sure that doesn't happen. Again, there's a downside and an upside. The upside is that if more people work from home, there will be fewer miles driven rather than more. Air quality will continue to be better. It may not be as good as it is right now, but it will be better. If there are fewer miles driven, we know there will be fewer traffic deaths. Although one of the things I didn't mention is that people are driving faster because the roads are not as crowded, so we're going to have to deal with that. And we may have a more balanced transportation system once we get through this. So a lot of people are saying that there will be upsides instead of downsides. So in that, I'm going to ask Sarah to bring up one more poll question and see if we can tell from all of you. We probably have a biased audience. What your what's likely to happen with this crowd in terms of, is it a positive or a negative working from home?
Okay, final countdown. Here we go.
So even in this crowd, there are some people who might move further from their workplace and take more personal trips. So I think the fear that that may be one of the outcomes is certainly one that we should pay attention to. But most of us would walk and bike more and probably ride transit more because presumably transit will be more available if this all happens. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing again and we'll go back, and we still have 15 minutes. I'd like to preserve about 2 or 3 minutes at the very end for one last poll question for my own use. Hopefully you guys won't mind if I do that. As a VRT board member, I want to know the answer to this last one. But in the meantime, thoughts, questions, comments, open mic.
Anybody have any questions for Elaine? Speak up.
Oh, come on, you guys are not that shy. I know you. Go ahead, Dave.
I was pleased to see that the city has created, at least temporarily, some separated and protected bike lanes through Julia Davis Park. What is the city doing to work with ACHD to take some cue from that and create some protected bike lanes on other things like streets?
That's a great question. And Deanna was online. I don't know if she still is. She can pipe up if she wants to. So from the city perspective, I was really supportive of that and hopeful that our new mayor would run with it. I think, you know, her office really has an awful lot to do right now because of the COVID, and didn't feel like they were going to make progress, so have turned it back over to the advocates, so to speak. I've talked to a couple of the commissioners, including the one who's online here, who I think would be supportive if we came with a good proposal to do that. I would say, in addition, while right now the ones that we have in Julia Davis Park are actually providing access to the Greenbelt, I'm working with the Parks Department personally to see if we can institute both in Julia Davis Park and in Ann Morrison Park similar roadway space in those parks for alternatives to the Greenbelt. If we were able to do that, we could ask bikes to go on the roadway and keep the Greenbelt for peds. And frankly, there's no reason in my mind that couldn't continue for some time, at least through next fall, if not longer. So certainly working on that. I think on the regular roadway network, an interesting thing that I believe we've learned is that there are some roads in particular that really have been overbuilt even for the conditions before COVID. And I think there's real opportunities on the Capitol Boulevard Hill, for instance, to do some long-term permanent changes to that facility that would provide bikes a lot safer way up and down that hill. And Deanna, you're welcome to pipe in.
Sure, there's others on the call who could also talk about this. So the city's kind of concluded, as Elaine said, that they're not going to take this on. There is a resurgence of the advocacy effort based on that there were 3-4 people who talked at the ACHD commission hearing today, and we're going to continue to pressure ACHD and present reasoning and voices asking for this. The additional new thing that we're targeting, and this is shifting around the country now that things are starting to open up, and the one other thing I do know that the city's doing is they're looking at possibly closing 8th, where all the restaurants are, so that there can be expanded space to expand the restaurants. We're at that time of year where we have a lot of patio dining anyway, but the restaurants patio dining is pretty constrained. And the only way to open that up would be to take the street and give the street to walkers and bikers, so the sidewalk could be consumed by more patio dining. And so that is something, my understanding, the city of Boise's looking at doing on 8th because they own 8th Street. That's something we're adding to our messaging to ACHD as another reason for this. So right now we're working on targeting particularly corridors that are either in projects that they're looking at in the next year or two. So it'd be an opportunity for them to pilot some projects that maybe they don't have final design on, and also to look at the roadways to bikeways master plan and think about where we could begin to look at how to convert, develop more of that, those routes. They're on low stress routes today, but they don't have signage, they don't have anything. Taft is a particularly good example. And the other thing we're really targeting is corridors that parallel the Greenbelt to alleviate pressure on the Greenbelt. And I'd love to hear some response to this. One suggestion and idea that we're thinking about pursuing, and this came from one of the individuals on this task force that we've put together last night or Monday night, was to think about taking bikes off the Greenbelt completely to allow more room for the people walking, and then really pressuring the open streets issue so that those cyclists can now move into the streets safely and confidently. I can tell you that the comments today from the director in response to some of the public comments was they have stopped doing any data collection, which is interesting. So we won't have any data collection for car counts during this time period. And that's unfortunate, I think. So we're also including that in our messaging. But one of the requests that we had put forward really strongly was Park Center, because it parallels so much of the Greenbelt and has plenty of capacity. There's 4 to 6 lanes depending upon where you are. And there's absolutely no reason right now in terms of traffic volumes that all of those lanes are necessary. We could easily take a lane out of Park Center tomorrow and it wouldn't impact a single driver. And then the other was Capitol that Elaine spoke about, is getting up that hill. And I thought it was interesting because Director Wong commented on how, Commissioner Arnold suggested that perhaps they should go out and be doing some bike counts, which, by the way, Treasure Valley Cycling Alliance is doing right now. So if you haven't signed up and you haven't counted this week, you still can today or tomorrow, and help get that information. But he suggested that maybe that would be useful because their data indicates there isn't any increase. Well, what they keep forgetting when they say this is there's not going to be any increased use on Capitol because nobody wants to be on Capitol. What we need is to create infrastructure on Capitol that invite people and make them feel comfortable and safe. So that's the wrong way to go about it, is to think, well, nobody's using it, so I guess that doesn't mean there isn't pent-up demand. And so I think we need to continue to put the pressure on them to show, yes, there is pent-up demand, and right now there's more pent-up demand than anything. And the last thing I'll add is that Commissioner Goldthorpe mentioned today in response to all this, that one of his concerns is, how do we go back? So as we resume to previous traffic levels, how do we go back if we make these temporary changes? And maybe we don't, maybe we do, but I think that's something ACHD needs to learn how to do. They need to learn how to communicate better to the public. They're terrified of doing demonstrations. They're terrified of doing pilots. And it's because they've done a few and they didn't do any PR around them. And so their hands got bit, which I fully understand. But they have a huge capacity there for PR and outreach. I mean, there's absolutely no reason they don't have the ability to explain to the community that this is temporary. And when volumes resume back to the previous demand, that's when we'll remove this temporary infrastructure. I just don't think the public's that stupid.
So if there's no bikes on the green belt so that the pedestrians can access the green belt more freely, what about my longboard? Like technically under state law, they're classified as a pedestrian on a longboard. So I don't know, does state law and city ordinance sort of conflict on that? I don't know.
Well, we don't have currently a ordinance on it. Go ahead, Deanna.
State law would concur with that. I don't know about city law. But
Yeah.
I would agree with you, and most national law would agree, and practice would agree that longboarder is a pedestrian.
Yeah. Ryan, the city has talked about, especially in the really crowded portions of the green belt, and I think this is one of the reasons I want to try both the Julia Davis and the Ann Morrison experiment, is that we think there's, we know that there's enough demand to have a pedestrian path and a wheel path. And although you'd be designated as a pedestrian, I think you'd probably be more comfortable, and pedestrians would be more comfortable if you used the wheel path. So,
what does the city of Boise think about Boise State University's policy for the dismount zone in their quad area? I was there in student government when that was put in. Somebody got hit. There was a crash.
yeah.
And so I think that it's there for like lip service. I don't know if they enforce that. Like, what does the city of Boise think about restricting access amongst multimodal users?
Well, it wouldn't be my choice, but because it's our campus and it's state land, I can't control it.
So I have a question in regards to keeping just pedestrians on the green belt and not having bicyclists. When are they looking at implementing? Because I'm comfortable biking on road, but I know a lot of bicyclists, especially the casual bicyclists. They don't feel comfortable on the roads and they want to be on the green belt. And as I watch people on the green belt, and their skill level with bicycles is so poor, I wouldn't want them on the roads. I personally feel like that's a bad idea.
So let me just clarify. No one is proposing that as a long-term permanent anything. That was a suggestion in response to this current demand that we're trying to put on ACHD around open streets. So to provide more safe social distance. So I totally agree with you. There's very few bicyclists comfortable riding on the road. We're trying to get them to commit more road to bikes, so dedicated roads, so closing a lane on Park Center and converting it to a bike lane, so that you're talking an 11, 12-foot bike lane. If that could happen, that segment of the green belt could then become ped only, because now you've given the bikes someplace safe and comfortable to ride. So that's the context that was suggested in, not any other context.
And that's just a suggestion from an advocacy group. None of the agencies have
right, and not even the group.
Yeah.
It's one person's idea, and it's the idea is that it'd be temporary during this need for social distancing.
So then would there be a barrier, cones or something on Park Center Boulevard? Because I've
yes
biked on Park Center.
Yeah, so it would be a protected lane.
Yeah, you'd have to put on, so I don't know how many of you rode, we had a lane of Myrtle, or what would be Park Boulevard, the segment of Park, people call it different things. So between Broadway and the West Park Center Bridge, for a whole year, a lane on that stretch was converted to a protected bike lane because of the Broadway Bridge construction, and the bike greenbelt had to be closed. And I don't know if any of you experienced that or rode it, but it was very successful, heavily used, very comfortable. And yes, they had Jersey barriers the entire length, plus at either end they had additional infrastructure for car collisions if they hit the barrier. Bright orange. It was just hugely used. It was packed. It was as busy as the greenbelt gets. So if you use the proper infrastructure, you absolutely can create safe, comfortable space on a road.
So before we, if there's one last question, then I'd really like to ask this one poll question. If anyone has one, we'll go to it.
I'm
If
going to
not,
ask. I'm going
go
to ask
ahead.
a question because we do need to wrap this up.
Yeah, we do.
This
So,
topic, no, I just want to, this topic is so full and people want to talk about it so badly. I don't know, Elaine, if you and Deanna want to stick around after
Sure.
3, and if people want to talk about road closures, because there is a group of us working on that, we can stay, but I want to wrap this up. So go ahead, Elaine, wrap up, and then I have one announcement for our next silver lining. So go ahead.
Okay, real quickly. So this poll may look biased, and maybe it is, and I apologize if it is, but there's only so much money in the world. And if we're going to improve the transit system in this region, I think there's some choices. People talk a lot about light rail, and light rail is $80 million a mile. Bus rapid transit is $5 million a mile. So if we spent the same amount of money that we spent on a light rail system, we could have a bus rapid transit network or a light rail line. And so the question is, in your mind, you know, keeping that sort of in mind, what should be the priority of VRT as they begin looking at what's the next thing we ought to do, really to make this network one that more people would use and that would be more useful. And maybe it still is light rail. Maybe light rail is worth it. Just wanted to put that context in. And the commuter rail, by the way, the commute service would parallel the freeway and take some of the traffic off of it. And you only get to choose one, so this is a tough one. Thank you. I appreciate that because I keep hearing light rail and I really do wonder if that's just a few people or if people really just do want an effective network system of some kind. And it looks like they do, both commuter and local. Thank you. Appreciate it.